This is the A to Z podcast. Expert insights on leadership, business, real estate, investing, and growth.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. Today, we're going to talk about high-performing teams. To help us understand how high-performing teams perform, and also to get some latest insights, science-based latest insights, strategies, and tactics that are going to help us to create and also run high-performing teams, we have Dr. David Burkus. He is a best-selling author, global public speaker, and also business consultant. He has been serving world-class organizations, and what he's going to share with us today going to be based on his work with these great organizations. I want to welcome Dr. David Burkus. Thank you very much for coming. I know how much busy you are. I'm glad that you're here to share with us your wisdom about high-performing teams.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's always good to connect, or I should say reconnect with you. So no, I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I want to start with where we connected. People who may not know where we knew each other. We met at Regent University. We were studying the doctoral strategic leadership program in 2009. Do you have any memory of that time? I know last time you were telling me about how lucky they are current students of the DSL program because we didn't have all the resources that they have today.
Yeah. Oh no, I remember. I remember vividly walking into that room, and you and I were probably in the same boat because we're roughly the same age. And I don't know if you remember this, like the vast majority of the room were late career professionals, right? Regent had really set up what I would call like an executive doctoral program designed for people at kind of the twilight of their career who were ready to retire from corporate and move into consulting and that sort of stuff. And then there was me, and I was like, I don't even know, 29, 30 years old at the time. And I just felt like, oh my goodness, right? But it turned out to be like an incredible blessing, right? I decided just not to have an ego about it, but to learn from as many different people as possible. And so we ended up like not only going through the program, having some amazing professors and what have you, but then having peers who were former chief financial officers at major automotive companies and two-star generals and rear admirals and all of these different people. And you get to learn from all of those different experiences. It was such a cool experience. But yeah, I do also remember telling you, I'm so jealous of it now. I actually have a friend who is just decided to be one of those people to sort of tail end of her career. I'm going to go start a doctoral program. And I thought, man, in an age of AI, right? In an age where you could feed every assigned reading, every book, everything into Notebook LM, and then have this repertoire of stuff to draw from when it came time to write a paper. I'm so jealous because we had to keep all of that in our brain. And maybe I had an Evernote file, right? I had an Evernote, but I still had to manually read it all. So I'm incredibly jealous. Not to say I think AI is going to replace the work, but just so much of the heavy lifting of chasing down the right citation and all of that sort of stuff that we had to go through is over. And I'm so jealous. I'm not saying I should have done the program now. I should have waited this long, but gosh, I'm a little bit envious for sure.
One thing I remember about when I was envious about you, because I remember you were ahead of us in terms of social media. I remember I was asking you questions about that time. I was planning to publish my first book, and I remember you and I still remember where we sat down asking you some questions on how I can self-publish, and you had a lot of resources, and you were ahead of, I would say, ahead of the curve back then, and it paid off because right now, when I look at your social media following and what you do in your business, it tells me that you had been already ahead of the curve, and now you're serving a larger number of people. So I'm glad that we reconnected.
Yeah. Oh no, thank you. I mean, it was a gamble, and it came from that first moment, that first residency, sitting there in the room with, again, chief executives and senior level military and governmental leaders, and me going, what in the world am I going to do? And so I kind of came out of that first residency saying, I don't have 40 years of experience to fall back on when I get out of this program. So maybe the only thing I can do is learn out loud to build a platform. And so when we would do message board posts inside of our classes, right, I would turn those into larger blog posts. And I started a podcast. I vividly remember coming out of the first residency, telling people I was going to do that, and they all said I was crazy. Then the second residency, which is a year later, there were 2 or 3 people that were like, hey, that's kind of cool. Can we join you? And then by the third residency, everybody was like, that thing you're doing is really cool. How do I be a part of it? And I'm like, you're too late, right? The time to jump on was the year before. But I mean, it literally came out of that. I don't know if you want to call it imposter syndrome or whatever, but coming out of that realization that like, wow, my only option here is to learn out loud and build this platform because I don't have the network that a lot of these people are going to have. So yeah. And now now we're more than almost 15 years out from that, and it's worked out pretty well so far. But yeah,
it looks like yesterday. I don't know where time goes. It's very fast, and I have connection only with a few of our cohorts. Part of the reason is that we all are very busy. The good thing is you and I, we've been in touch. We are almost communicating on social media. You endorsed one of my books. Thank you again. So it's a great opportunity right now for us to have this conversation. I want to ask you one personal question. I know you travel a lot outside of the United States. Do you mind to share with us if you have any, for example, surprising circumstance, or maybe something that shocked you, or something that stunned you, or something you want to share with us from your memory of traveling around the world?
Yeah. Oh man, that's an interesting one. So yeah, I've been lucky enough to be almost every continent. I think I'm in Antarctica and one more beyond that in terms of work related. And I would say, I mean, I don't want to point to any one incident, but I would say this: the thing that I think is most interesting as I travel and work with folks in different countries is there truly is a national level of optimism that is incredibly powerful. You go to some countries where you would think like, oh, this is coming out of a more autocratic dictatorship regime, but things are changing, but oh, it must be horrible to live here. And the people are incredibly optimistic about their future, right? And then you go to some season like Europe, I'm looking at you go to some countries that have been around for hundreds of years and well-established and great social structures and what have you, but the people are just so pessimistic about their future. And it's interesting because we can, whatever one you're in, whatever culture you're in, optimism or pessimism, it's easy to believe the entire world sees it the same way, but they don't. There are vast differences in the level of national optimism in different countries. And it's really an interesting thing to see because it makes all the difference in the world in terms of entrepreneurial ventures, in terms of intrinsic motivation, in terms of just overall culture. And it's not people, I mean, it sounds weird to say my big revelation is that people don't think like you, but I meant in this particular sense, not everybody has the same perspective on what the future holds as you or as the culture that you're in holds. And I think that's a really interesting lesson to learn.
Yeah, I love this kind of stories because when I came first to the United States, I remember the cultural shock. When I was in Ethiopia, I was thinking that everywhere in the world, things were communicating the way we were communicating. People were dressing and also having the same culture and traditions. When I came here, oh my gosh, I didn't expect. I struggled a little bit. I survived. And one thing I appreciate when I talk to other people is that I don't need to go to that country. I can learn from this person so that if I go to that country in the future, I don't need to experience the same kind of cultural shock. Yeah, we all need that kind of really to adopt.
Yeah, and I mean, again, cultural differences. We studied cultural differences in our doctoral program, right? So they're not surprising. I guess I just never considered like optimism to be one of those cultural differences, right? And it really truly is. I'm sure you saw it even coming from Ethiopia to the United States and what have you, and then being here for so long and then traveling to countries with a little less optimism. Or I don't know where the United States is currently on the optimism scale. I feel like we're vacillating a lot recently, but just traveling to somewhere else, I didn't think of that as a personality dimension for a country, but it truly is. It's fascinating.
Yeah, definitely. In my case, when I came to the United States, one of the things I struggled you already know this, that there are cultures that are communal based and there are
Mhm.
cultures that are individual based. And when you compare the two cultures, I'm not saying which one is better or not, because all cultures, they are benefiting their people. They keep them because they're working for them. But one thing I noticed was coming from a communal culture, coming to the US was almost like opposite. Everything looked for me opposite.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
here is the trick now. Since I lived in the United States since 2005, when I go back to Ethiopia, I struggle again because I forgot how our culture was running. I lived here for 20 years, something, and then I adopted a lot of cultural elements of the United States. When I go back, my friends, my relatives, my colleagues, they look at me, the way I talk, the way I make eye contact, my gestures, everything, and they will say, oh my gosh. Some of them, they are open. They tell me, oh, you're Americanized. Now you don't want to be Ethiopia. For them, they think I was consciously changing. I
Yeah.
was not consciously changing. I am living here. I am talking to people. I'm doing business with different people. Without me knowing it, I'm adapting to the culture. That's the power of culture, because
Yeah.
culture is so powerful. It dictates the way you think, your mindset, the way you communicate, your expectations, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I totally agree. I totally agree. And it's, ironically, it's kind of a fun segue. And one of the reasons why, in my work, I've been sort of gradually narrowing down, right? So when you do a program like we did, you look at organizational leadership and organizational psychology as this whole realm, and then you move down into what you kind of want to study, and gradually you move narrower and narrower. And so for me, it was moving from what are the study of what leaders do to actually, okay, let's talk about team dynamics. And then it's really just been for the last 5 years or so, let's talk about team culture again, because if you can change the culture, you can change the engagement, you can change the performance, you can change the whole organization by looking in at that. So yeah, I don't know, I've become a culture nut in that regard.
Yeah. Let me ask you this question before we dive in and
Yeah.
talk about the main themes of our conversation. I know you have a trained eye, I would say metaphorically, when you go to work with teams. Could you be able to sense right away whether a team is high performing or not? If so, what are some of the red flags or some of the indicators that tell you that this is not a high performance team?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I really can sense it right away. I mean, okay. So occasionally, most of the client work that I do, I'm privileged to be able to know what the past track record of said team is, right? So I already there's a little self-selection bias in that, right? And then I already know who are the historical high performers and who aren't. But some of the times I don't. And what I would say I look for as predictors, I can sense two red flags, if you will. I mean, high performers come in a variety. There's some cultural commonalities, but you can't really sense it. But low performing, miserable cultures, it's kind of like, what's that Tolstoy quote, right? All happy families are alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own unique way. It's actually the opposite, right? A lot of high performing team cultures have some differences, some commonalities. Most miserable toxic cultures are toxic for the same few reasons. And so I look for two big red flags to know if somebody's not necessarily going to be a high performer. The first is in leadership. One of the most common questions I ask team leaders is, when was the last time someone on your team disagreed with you in front of everybody else? Right? If they can't tell me, that's a huge red flag, right? Because silence is not golden on teams. Disagreement means that people feel free and safe to speak their mind, right? So you want a team where people feel like they can disagree with the boss about task-focused things. Obviously, we're not talking about personal conflicts and that sort of stuff. So you want that. If they can remember, that's great. Let's talk about how it went, and then I can kind of suss it out from there, right? But so that's the first thing I look for, is how much of the sort of polite disagreement, respectful dissent is there on the team, especially between the team and the leader. And then the second thing I look for as a red flag is what I call recreational complaining, right? In other words, complaining for the sake of complaining. It's one thing to bring a complaint to someone who has the power to actually change it. It's one thing to say, this is wrong and I'm going to the boss who has the power to change it. It's a whole other thing to be complaining to a peer who can't do anything about it. People are doing that as a form of either coping or as a form of, like I said, recreation. It's fun to do that. It's fun to sort of vent, but it's not actually going to change anything. And a lot of times in the lowest performing teams, you see a lot of that recreational complaining of, we're just complaining for the sake of complaining. So if I look for those two things, if I see either one of those, that's a pretty strong red flag.
Yeah, thank you. We will definitely dive into to talk about feedback and disagreement and so on. But I want to start from the foundation, which is, you can correct me about this, but from my observation, almost many teams, they want to be high performing. But the problem is that some are soaring and performing, others are not. My question then is, what are the drivers for those teams that are high performance? What make them high performing teams?
Yeah. So, the flip side of that, right? You'd ask about red flags, and now let's talk about, I guess, green flags. Like I said, this plays out. It takes longer to sense this in a team because it plays out in a lot of different ways. But again, it's a cultural thing. And when we look about, like what we talk about in my latest book, Best Team Ever, when we talk about the culture of a team, we fundamentally I'm looking for three cultural elements. What I call common understanding. Sometimes the research literature calls it shared understanding. So common understanding, a sense of psychological safety, which is actually a lot of what I was just talking about, was the lack of psychological safety. And then a sense of pro-social purpose or intrinsic motivation, right? So common understanding is how well the team is clear on their deliverables, their roles and responsibilities. They know how everyone's work fits into the larger whole, but they also know each other and have sort of a shared understanding of each other's personality differences, strengths and weaknesses, workplace preferences, communication preferences, all of that sort of stuff, right? So I like to think of that as how well the team like clicks. How well do you just enjoy being on the team? Well, it's probably because you feel like those people actually know you and you know them, and as a result, you can collaborate better. Psychological safety is that freedom to speak up when we disagree, that freedom to share new ideas, to talk about failures without feeling like you're going to be made fun of, ostracized, penalized, etc. And then that last one, pro-social purpose. I think that we're all familiar with purpose. We're all familiar with Simon Sinek's why. So what does this pro-social mean? Well, one of the things we found about the last 10 years of research on purpose is that the most motivating purpose for most individuals and for most teams is a tangible sense of who, not necessarily why. Who is served by the work that we're doing? If we as a team are doing a good job, here is the stakeholder, the fellow team, the end user, whoever it is. Here is the who, whose life is made better or whose work is made better by us doing a great job. And you find
do you think that's because of the way we are wired, where we care more about other people, we care about more about serving other people than serving ourselves? Do you think that's the human psychology?
Yeah. I mean, humans are social creatures, right? Even individualistic cultures, like in the United States. I think it comes from, if you want to go really, really nerdy on pro-social purpose, if you remember things like, Robin Dunbar and Dunbar's number, the idea that we were in tribes of around 150, et cetera. I think we were designed to see our impact on the world in much smaller communities. It used to be much easier to know you were making a positive impact because there was just your tribe and you could see how you're helping them and you're supporting them, right? And now we're in these large multinational organizations, which is great. I think the organization is probably the greatest invention that humans have ever come up with, because the ability to just continue to collaborate at scale has done things no other species on this planet has been able to do. I think that's great. But it also comes with some drawbacks. When you have a 10,000 person multinational organization and you're trying to get them all to be synced up against this mission statement that needs to apply to everyone, well, it's really hard to see yourself in that. And so what we were designed to do was to see ourselves and our impact based on a few people, a who. So yeah, I think it goes right back into, tens of thousands of years ago, into how we were designed to see purpose. And the smartest teams, the highest performing teams, they don't do things that they're not misaligned from the mission or the vision. What they've done is they've figured out their role in making that mission a reality. And then they figured out the next step, which is who is counting on us to fulfill that mission. And it makes for a lot more intrinsic motivation. And the other thing you see is that it makes for a lot more willingness to put your own ego and your own agenda aside for the good of the team. And that's what makes for stronger team working. Or us, AZ. People like us like to come up with fancy terms. So we learned it in residency. We learned it in the doctoral program. We learned it as organizational citizenship behaviors. But that's just a fancy word for teamwork. You see better, more teamwork when people have this stakeholder-centered purpose.
So let me ask you, how can you help? Because what you're telling me, if I captured it correctly, is large corporations may struggle to motivate people to dive into and give their best. Part of the reason is they're large. The question then is there a way these large organizations sound and like small teams so that people have that touch with the customers? They feel like they are part of the team. They feel they belong.
Yeah. So here's the interesting thing. You don't necessarily have to have everyone in the organization to feel like they're in touch with the customers. Certainly the majority, like Vinette Nair used this term value zone for anyone in a large multinational that actually is a customer facing role, right? And it's bigger than you think, but certainly those people can get that sense of who from sort of customers. But a lot of us our customers are internal customers. If we do a great work over here, it's going to affect that. Like, 2 or 3 weeks ago, I was working with an organization, and the entire team, they were legal, compliance, risk management people, right? That's really easy to get burned out because everybody sees you as the ones who kill the fun, right? Your job is just to tell people what they can't do because it puts things at risk. Your job is just to audit people's behavior for ethical violations and make sure everyone's in compliance with policies. But that's not really true. That's not the core. The reason for the job is that you protect the rest of the organization. When you do a good job, you shield them from lawsuits, which would steal revenue and steal the ability for the organization to make an impact. Not to mention are hugely demotivating for anyone who's ever been subpoenaed, right? So you're protecting the rest of the organization. You're empowering the rest of the organization to do what they do without fear because you're doing it, right? That's a reframe we had to come up with. We even came up with we started using a reference to that movie from the 90s, Braveheart, with Mel Gibson. There's that scene where the cavalry is chasing at them and they're saying, hold the line, hold. Like we kept doing that and using this rally of like, what do? We hold the line. We protect the rest of the firm, right? The reason I give you this story, not just because it's cool and it made me think of Mel Gibson, which is always great, is that the point is, as the CEO of an organization can't do this. Just by nature, the CEO of the organization cannot tell every individual team who their who is. What the CEO can do is talk to the other leaders of the team about how important it is to do this. And every leader at every level needs to take that into consideration with their team, with his or her team, and figure out what that own team specific or department specific who is. That can be done. But it takes a little bit more work than just getting out there and having a global town hall and vision casting for 12 minutes or 15 minutes, right? It's going to take individual leaders to get trained how to do it.
Yeah, you put it nicely. It doesn't work from top down. You have to create that decentralization where teams have the ability for them to create a subculture, which doesn't have to be misaligned, but at least they have to have a subculture where they feel like they belong to that team and organization. Let's transition to feedback, because you mentioned earlier about feedback. I know one of the things that could be able to help high-performing teams is the culture. I want to ask you about what should be in place for teams to have these pro-feedback culture where they long to get feedback, especially tough feedback they may not want to get from others. How can you create that kind of feedback where people are effective in providing feedback that turn into results and also receive feedback gracefully?
Yeah. Well, let's actually start the opposite way, right? Let's start with receive, because building a feedback-rich culture really depends on how well people perceive their leaders as being receptive to feedback. It's one of the reasons I asked that question about like, when's the last time somebody disagreed with you, is that if you have a culture where people feel like they can't give feedback up, if it's only ever flowing down, then it's always going to feel negative. Not necessarily even positive feedback. It's always still going to feel like judgment. It's going to feel like grading. We went through that. First 2 decades of everybody's life, we went through a world where all of the adults and the superiors in our life were telling us what we did right and did wrong and what have you. And then we become adults, and we shouldn't be stuck in that same mentality. It needs to be much more collaborative. So the single best thing you can do to create a pro feedback culture as a leader is to be receptive to feedback. I think about like big public examples of this work really well. For example, I don't know how many people are familiar with it, but like Ray Dalio at Bridgewater Associates, there's a famous example of him trying to build a feedback-rich culture. And one of the first things he had to do was he kept encouraging people to give him feedback on his performance, tell him how I'm doing. And then he got an email from just a random associate, nobody all that significant in the organization, that said, "Hey, Ray, I just wanted to give you some feedback. I was in the meeting with you today, and I felt like you weren't even there. I felt like you were phoning it in. I felt like you weren't really paying attention to what the client wanted, and you weren't really giving us anything. And you just you were somewhere else. What's up with that?" And Ray forwarded that email to the entire company and said, "This is the exact type of feedback all of us need to get better. I appreciate you letting me know this," right? Think about what that does to an organization, a very public display of that, right? And one of my favorite other examples, I actually already mentioned him, was Vinet Nair. Vinet Nair was the founder of HLC Technologies, one of the largest, most successful firms in India. It's a global technology, consulting technology implementation firm, right? And one of the things he did was implemented 360-degree feedback even in the executive level. So when he was still running things, they had a system when they did their annual performance cycle. His was open to anyone in the organization, because again, his job was to support everyone in the organization. Anyone in the organization could contribute to his 360 feedback collection. And then he publicly shared all of the feedback, and more importantly, what he learned from it and what he was going to be doing from it, right? So for leaders to build this feedback-rich culture, you have to show people how to receive feedback. And you do that by being very public about it. Not just saying, "I want the feedback," but coming back to the organization and saying, "Here's what I'm going to do as a result."
Before you go forward, I studied Bridgewater, and I love what Ray Dalio did. And actually, Ivy League universities, they studied the culture, radical transparency. I want to ask you, because a lot of organizations, they know that radical transparency or having a pro-feedback culture is important, but we don't see leaders like Ray Dalio opening up and creating that kind of culture by example. And because of that, yes, there are studies, they have all the steps how to create that, but they struggle to do it. What do you think is a very reason why leaders are not setting example? Or do you have any suggestion how to make it easy for them to step up and to start to create that kind of example?
Yeah. Well, I think twofold, right? So number one is we can sometimes be far more protective as a large organization over things like feedback, right? Because we don't want it if our employees are complaining about something, we don't want our competitors to know that, right? I get that. I totally understand that. And so we'll do things like take an annual engagement survey, and then the results are lower than we expected. And so even when we're talking about them inside of the C-suite, we slap confidential on the slide deck and we make sure no one ever knew them. And that's a problem, right? The single best thing, I don't think as a leader, I don't think you have to share everything like Ray Dalio or Vinet Nair. I don't think you have to share everything. But the single thing I think where most of this breaks down, and I see this with so many client organizations of mine, where most of this breaks down is we collect feedback from the whole organization, a pulse survey, engagement survey, 360 feedback, et cetera. And then we implement changes. We do. I've yet to meet a leader who doesn't take that feedback and say, "We need to use this to get stronger." I see that all the time. Where the breakdown comes is with sharing it back. And so you can go and share all of it back the way a Dalio or Vinet Nair would, but at a minimum, if you are collecting feedback, you need to go back to the people you asked for feedback and say, "Here's what we're changing as a result of your feedback." You don't have to go into every single specific and every single complaint, et cetera, but you do have to show them something's happening. I can't tell you, again, I meet so many leaders up here in the C-suite who care about that feedback and want to make a change. And then I also talk to their very same employees in the middle or in the front line who feel like, "Ugh, there's no point doing this engagement survey because nothing ever changes anyway." Well, stuff changes. They just don't see it because, again, leaders aren't going, "Here's what we learned from it. Thank you so much." That single thing, right? Showing, whether it's Ray Dalio forwarding the whole email or just a random CEO saying, "Here's the 2 big changes we're making as a result of your feedback." Showing people that you heard them and that you're changing is the number one way to ensure you're going to get feedback next time.
Yeah, I love it. It's about being vulnerable. And your suggestion is very practical because you don't need to be like Ray Dalio. You don't need to be an open book to start with. You can start with a smaller scale where you feel like, okay, I'm comfortable to share this. And the practicality of what you're suggesting at a smaller scale, at individual level, when we coach individuals, we ask them to take 360 assessment. They take the
Yeah.
assessment. One of the advices that we give them is when you return to the organization, why don't you send a short email to the people who gave you feedback? And the first thing you want to say is, thank you for providing the feedback to me. I am going to act on this, on this, on this, based on your feedback, and I want to appreciate you. The advantage of being open and saying people thank you for your feedback and showing them that you are taking some steps is they're going to come back again to provide feedback to you. Not only that, they're going to support you because now you told them, okay, because of your feedback, you don't need to act on all feedback, like you said. You can share with them one or two or three things and say that going forward, the next 6 months or the next 1 year, these are the things I want to do. When they see that, if they have any resource or any suggestion, or if they want to connect you with people or offer feedback while you are growing or giving you a resource, they will support you. And I love the practicality and the simplicity of what you're suggesting for leaders to become exemplary, to create that kind of pro feedback culture.
Yeah.
I know I cut you off. You were trying to tell us
No.
yeah.
Yeah, no, you're dead on. You're dead on. And what you said is everything in line with what I was going to say. That I was just going to add on, and you already hit on it, is that if you haven't figured this out in your leadership journey, when people like whenever there's a power gap, people self-censor, right? Until you build a high level of trust and psychological safety. So when you ask for feedback, when anything happens, if you haven't figured this out in your leadership journey, you're actually not getting the 100% truth. Right? Whether it's asking for feedback on your performance or whether it's somebody coming to you with a problem, they're not coming to you with the whole problem. They're not coming to you with what they truly think. They're coming to you with a censored version of the thing that's censored to the level that they trust you. So maybe they're trying to minimize the unpleasantness of it or scale down the impact of it or spin it into a positive or something like that, because if they haven't built that trust with you yet, they're waiting to see what your reaction is. And so to your exact point, like when you work with executives, you know, okay, the thing we're going to do now is we're going to send them out a thank you note. What they're seeing in that moment is, wow, okay, they didn't bite my head off. They didn't go crazy like a volcano. They didn't fly off the handle. They responded to this well. So the next time they're going to come with a more true version of it, because now there's some level of trust and it's going to go on. You're not going to get 100% radical transparency on the first interaction. But when they give you a little transparency and you respond properly, you get more the next time and more the next time and more the next time.
One thing I want to ask you, now I'm a learning professional, but when I had a team, one of the things I did to create that kind of pro feedback culture was that I wanted to create uniformity. And I remember I had a template. I created 2 columns, one column to tell people what went well, to give them specific example, and another column where they share with them what could be done differently. And one of the things I used to do was every month when we have team meetings, I come with printouts. After the meeting for the next 20 minutes, I give everybody, including myself, I tell them, hey, you can pick 2 people today. Here are the templates. Go out and give them feedback. Somebody may grab me and provide feedback to me. And if I have 2 people at the top of my mind to provide feedback, it's powerful because they don't take it personal. I'm just grabbing them because I'm supposed to give 2 feedback today. Do you have any suggestion in terms of, because the challenge is if the leader is providing feedback and graceful in receiving feedback, if it's not duplicated, if not everybody doing it, you cannot have a culture. When the culture is created, one of the things you hear people say is, oh my gosh, I'm not getting any feedback. What's wrong? Because it's a culture. People expect it. If they don't get it, they complain about it. They don't complain because they got. They complain if they don't get, because it's part of their culture. Any tips, any strategies, anything they should do to create that kind of scalability and uniformity?
Yeah. So, you know, it's ironic, right? I always talk about this when I talk about having clear expectations and high levels of accountability. People worry about being seen as a micromanager. And I always say, no, like high performers you can't exceed expectations unless you know what they are. Right. And so you can't be known as a phenomenal teammate unless you know what the expectations of your teammate are. So yeah, the only thing I would say is that I think one of the potential breakdowns in peer-to-peer feedback is that the first thing we need to recognize, kind of like we were talking about with cultures before, the first thing we need to recognize is that people go about their jobs differently. And as a result, like the way that you would want something to be done is not necessarily the way everybody's going to agree with it. So when you are teaching your people to give each other feedback, to develop that sort of feedback-rich culture, you have to make sure that feedback is, that the power in receiving that feedback is still with the recipient. I'm a big fan of, for example, Pixar and the brain trust and the idea of giving feedback. What they also say, it has to be plussed. You have to add a plus, right? And the idea is that I can give you constructive criticism. I can tell you what's going wrong. I can tell you where you're disappointing the team. I can point out negative things, but I have to give you a plus. I have to add my own suggestion, right? So this would be, what worked well is great, but there's no action to that. And then I have to give you an even better if, hey, what if you tried this? What if you did it this way? But in the end of any brain trusted Pixar, in the end of any plussing session, the person receiving the feedback still has the right to accept or reject the feedback, right? So the idea here is I'm giving you this feedback because I'm a peer. I don't have the authority to make you change. If I'm a boss, it's different. Because I'm a peer, I have to say, these are just my suggestions on the ways to do it. Not how I would do it, although if you want to say that and make it just goes, but I have to give you the right to accept or reject that feedback. And I think too often the reason feedback breaks down inside of teams peer-to-peer is that people are just giving feedback as if this is the best way to do it. No, that's your way to do it. And I appreciate learning about your way to do it. But if I try your way to do it and I decide I still sort of don't like it, you have to surrender the right to get mad at me because I found a way that works better for me. Does that make sense? Like that. So that
yeah. I like the balance. You're right. Yeah, because you're right. There is a danger. If you are dictating the how, that becomes very hard. It becomes micromanaging.
Right.
What you should do is just give them the skill set, maybe role play with them. Especially one challenge I have seen is that even if you have a pro feedback culture, when somebody is introduced into that team, this person doesn't know when we started this culture and they may struggle. And then maybe you need to give them a little bit role play to show them how it's done. But like you said, afterward, depending on the person they are giving feedback and the situation and the timing, they should have that ability to customize and give feedback so that it feels like natural. It feels like them, and I appreciate that.
And that's not to say you tell people don't give hows to teammates, right? But just respect that, like, basically, if you did something totally wrong in a meeting, 3 people are going to come to you with feedback. Each of those hows are going to be slightly different. And now your job is to receive the feedback for sure, but then your job is to figure out which of those possible remedies works best for me. And in selecting one or combining, like I'm going to disappoint 2 people if I pick one. And if I do what most people do, which is take all 3 and then come up with a 4th option that works best for me, now everyone's disappointed? No. Surrender your ego, right? We want your feedback on what's going wrong and we want your suggestions. But if you're not someone's like authoritative boss, you don't have the right to make them act the way you want them to act. You just have to show the desire that you're trying to help them. And if this works for you, great. If it doesn't work for you, great. Right. And so I think that's a lot of us need to kind of surrender our egos when giving feedback.
Yeah, I can imagine if a leader has ego, it would be hard for them to receive feedback because psychologically they may think, I know everything. You just joined my team. I have the authority. I know how things are done. Who are you to give me feedback? You're right. They have to set that example. And I love everything should depend on the leader setting the tone, not micromanaging, but setting the tone. And I love that. Earlier, when you talked about psychological safety, I want to talk about conflict because when you have a team which is high performing, one of the things you want to be very careful is that you don't want to derail the performance because of some tensions, disagreements, and conflicts. And definitely a high-performing team will have some disagreements. That's why they are high performers, because they go for creativity, innovation. They do things very innovatively. Definitely that leads to conflict and disagreement. The question is, what should be done to equip team members to turn conflicts into opportunities, to know how to get along with people that disagree with them?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, the first thing I would say is there's different types of conflicts inside of teams, right? I think all human conflict, but certainly all team-based conflict, is going to fall into one of two categories. It's going to be task-focused conflict, which is fine, and we'll talk about how to leverage that in a second, or it's going to be personal conflict. Now, as a leader, or even as an influential teammate, personal conflict, that needs to be squashed immediately. Right? If somebody is just being overly toxic, overly negative, you need to call that person out in front of the room and address that negative behavior. If two people are constantly sort of at each other, you need to pull them aside eventually and have a one-on-one intervention to kind of solve that, right? And in doing so, you build a psychological safe culture just because you're saying we don't do that, right? Then there's task-focused conflict. And what's tricky is that task-focused conflict, that's fighting over ideas. That's multiple smart people having multiple different possible solutions to the problem we're facing as a team. I want that, because my best chance of having the right answer, finding the best answer, I should say, not necessarily the right, but the best option, is to have lots of different options. So I want that. But then as a leader, I have to teach the team how to fight right, which is a bit of what your question was getting at. But I didn't want to make people think like, oh, that means I don't have to address personal conflict. You do. But on the task-focused conflict side, what I really need is I need to teach the team. I'm like a referee as a leader. I need to teach the team how to fight right. And my first big rule, and probably if you do this, you'll find rules that work for your team elsewhere too. My first big rule is, when we're in conflict over an idea, we don't criticize the person, for sure. We don't criticize the idea. We question the assumptions behind it. Like, the way to have a proper task-focused conflict is not to get people to defend their idea, but to defend the assumptions behind it. So what this looks like in practice is not like, AZ, you come to me, you've got an idea for something, and I just think, oh my gosh, that's too expensive and it doesn't actually pay off. It's a ridiculous solution because of how expensive it is. I don't say that. Right? I don't say we don't have the budget for that. That'll never work. I say, oh, that's an interesting idea. Okay, let me think through this. Help me out though. What do you think it would cost to make that idea a reality? Have you given any thought to that? Right? If not, okay. And then do we have that money? Is there a payoff there? Like, I guide you through that set of assumptions. Or maybe it's a hours, a manpower issue, like a labor issue. How many people do you think you need on a team to pull off that initiative? Have you researched that? Do you know that? Right? So when two smart people disagree and you've got conflict over an idea, most of the time, there are fringe cases, but most of the time it's not because one of them is smart and the other has turned their brain off and is just an idiot in this area. It's not that. It's that they're both operating logically and intelligently from a different set of assumptions. So as a leader, what we need to do to leverage this conflict, to keep it from getting personal and to help find the best idea, is we need to examine the assumptions behind the idea that everybody has. And then we need to go figure out which set of assumptions is accurate. What is that going to cost? And is there going to be a payoff on that? Or is a different option maybe not as good an option, but it's the option we can afford right now, right? Or whatever it is. So that's what we do. We question those assumptions. And by the way, just because you can't think of the assumptions doesn't mean you shouldn't necessarily be questioning the assumptions. I got a trick for that too. And that is that one of my favorite questions to ask people as we're brainstorming through different ideas and judging them and teasing them out is, as somebody submits their possible solution, I'll just say, okay, what would have to be true for that idea to be our best option? In other words, let's think through this, right? Tell me your assumptions.
Yeah, I love one thing. I want to talk to you a little bit more on that one. One of the pushbacks I get from high performers is that they don't want this friction within their teams, and they want to avoid any kind of conflict. What you're talking about is, if you make it conversational, if you ask questions, because the conflict and the friction comes if you attack their assumptions, if you attack their proposal. But if you ask, like you said, what made you to think that? Have you considered this? What I tell leaders is, even if you know the answer to that and this idea doesn't work, like you said, if the budget doesn't allow you, or this doesn't align with the mission of the team, it's not a good idea to push back immediately. You can explore with them, make it conversational, and at least take 1 hour or one day, if you want to push back, if you want to have that conversation to push back on that idea, at least take a break, think about it. The idea is, if you push back immediately, next time they may not engage with you and disagree with you. But if you take time, think about it, come back again and tell them the flaws of their ideas. After asking them questions, they see that you have taken your time. They think that it's a safe, psychologically safe environment.
Yeah. Yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was gonna say exactly, right? Like the two things the high performers, they don't want to be in an argument that, it's emotionally draining. I get that. And then they don't want to feel like they weren't heard. It's okay, right? Most people can live with, if my idea was heard, if it was weighed, if it was measured, and it was found wanting, that's okay. I was still heard. Where a lot of dysfunction happens on teams is that people don't actually feel heard before they're rejected. And so as a leader, even if, and this is hard, because I'm just gonna be real for a second. I mean, I've been real this whole time, but here's another example. As a leader, some ideas are dumb. Like, you're going to hear ideas from teammates that are like, that's the stupidest thing I have ever heard. But you still have to make sure that person feels heard, and you bring them to a place through questions, through asking them the assumptions, through really considering it, where they realize, okay, actually, yeah, that idea wasn't worth nearly as much as I was excited about. I just got overly enthusiastic about it. I got too emotionally attached to it, right? You have to bring them to that place. Otherwise, you're not going to hear the next idea, and the next idea might be brilliant.
Yep. It could change the trajectory of that team. That's the emotional intelligence part. You hear a bad idea from your perspective. It could be a great idea if you explore it, but from the top of your mind, this is a crazy idea. You could push back. What you're doing is killing innovation and creativity and destroying this safe cultural environment where people are willing to disagree with you, come up with ideas. You may not agree with you. I want to transition to AI, but before that, I know you may have some tools or maybe some case studies or maybe some stories you want to share with us. Some teams that you don't need to mention the team, but what are some of the things these companies, I know you work with world-class organizations, what are some of the recent or the latest approach they use to create that kind of environment where people are bold enough to disagree, people feel safe to contradict and disagree with someone?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of it, it's funny. We're in this weird spot where starting in 2000, a lot of clients became very, very interested, for good reason, became very, very interested in taking their diversity and inclusion efforts seriously, right? And invested a lot in that. And then, dare I say, some maybe overemphasized it, or I don't know what happened, but there was a backlash, and now it's sort of like there's a lot of words that have been lumped into that. I say that because I'm a huge proponent of psychological safety, and yet for some reason psychological safety gets lumped into that. And so we're in this weird spot with a lot of the clients that I work with, where there is a realization that psychological safety is probably the most important thing, and at the same time there's like a desire to avoid that word. Maybe it's the safety in it, because we all have these weird memories of like safe spaces and that sort of stuff. And we think it just means blanket amnesty for everybody, and let's all hug and say kumbaya. And that's not what a high performing team looks like, right? A high performing team is not one where you're never going to hear an idea that you disagree with. It's one where you're going to have the chance to state your disagreement. And so I'm seeing, like, a lot of the clients that I'm using the words like trust much more often and building trust much more often. And it's funny because our traditional approaches to trust building are, dare I say, pre-pandemic approaches. We need to get everybody together. We need to do this team building activity. That's not what I'm doing with a lot of my clients, because that doesn't necessarily work. And a lot of them, we're not in the same space anymore. We're still in, whether we're back in the office or not, we're still collaborating virtually with a lot of different people. And so a lot of it becomes this work, right? This work of teaching people how to role playing through scenarios of how are we going to respond to this. And sometimes it works great, and other times I have to have really uncomfortable conversations with clients because I tell them the way they're going about it is wrong and it's undermining trust and that sort of thing. But that's probably been the bulk of what I'm getting questions around right now, are like, how do I as a leader build trust with my people. And that makes me have to go, okay, let's talk about your interactions with them on a regular basis. And this is in every industry. I mean, this year alone in banking and finance and tech and military and government and all and nonprofit, just sort of every industry. I think there's a real trust deficit going on right now. And smart leaders are figuring out, I need to change my behaviors to change that trust deficit.
Can you give us a couple of tips on how to generate trust? Because some leaders may assume that, hey, I'm trustworthy and I have the best interests of others. And therefore, I don't need to go the extra mile or be intentional and proactive to create trust. But you and I know that trust is a two-way street. And therefore, if I want to initiate trust, I should not wait until people trust me. I can do certain things to generate trust, and therefore people reciprocate that, and I can have that trust built quickly. Otherwise, trust is going to take forever if you wait organically. Do you have any wisdom, any advice?
So I talk about it as kind of three elements. Trust works in a loop. Like you said, it's a two-way street, right? I talk about it as three elements in a loop. The first is that you give it away. You don't wait for people to earn your trust. You give them their trust. Now, you give them their trust and you verify, right? If somebody betrays your trust, that's a different issue. But you hired smart, skilled adult humans, so you should be giving them some level of trust by default, right? By the very fact that we as an organization decided that they had the knowledge, skills, abilities, and intent to be a valuable member of the team, you should give them some level of trust, right? When people, we see this in a myriad of different research, when people feel trusted, they're more likely to trust you in your turn. So how do you get people to trust you? You give them trust first. The next step is sort of, if they feel like they could trust you, they'll take a leap. And we already kind of talked about this with that, that they're not giving you 100%, right? They're giving you a version of it. They trust you. Why? Because they're testing you. They'll do something to test that trust. They'll take a leap of faith. Maybe it's a disagreement. Maybe it's a new idea. Maybe it's talking about something they messed up on and asking for help. It comes in a lot of different forms. As a leader, what can you do? The best thing you can do is de-risk that. Right. And so we've already talked about this in past too, is de-risk it, one, by sharing that you're receptive to feedback, but two, by asking for it candidly, right? You lower the distance it feels like they have to leap. And then the last step is when they take that leap, they have to feel respected. They have to feel heard. We sort of talked about that with when you're in disagreement and in conflict, but it's the same thing in a failure. They have to feel like you're not going to judge them for all time as a failure, that you respect that mistakes happen. And unless this person's consistently underperforming, like that, my job is to help you make sure you don't make that mistake next time, to learn from it next time. So it's this loop of like trust, leap, respect, right? They trust, I take this risk, this leap of faith in you. And then as a leader, I have to feel that I respect you. And so when I work with clients, and I can't get into the nitty gritty because a lot of NDAs and that sort of stuff. When I work with clients, that's the thing I'm trying to tease out, is where is the breakdown? Is it the first place, they don't trust you because you're not willing to trust them? Is it that you haven't de-risked the leap? Or, and this is the case in most organizations, is it because nobody taught you how to make people feel respected after they share, right? And so it depends on where it is, but that's a lot of the work that we're doing now.
Yeah, when I facilitate team building exercises, one of the things that I bring up is I ask them, if you have ever been a part of a high performance team, what are some of the things that you have seen? And we boil down, they may come up with like 30, 40 factors that helped that team to be a high performing team. But when we distill it down, it comes down to three things. They have common goals, and they communicate very well. And the last thing is trust. There is a strong relationship and trust. And I ask them questions, follow-up questions. One of the questions I ask is, if you have to deal with one of these, which may take you long time and efforts, which one would you pick? And in most cases, they would tell me, trust, because they're right. If they don't have common goals, you can help them within an hour, even within 2-3 hours. That's it. If they have struggle in communication, if they don't have any communication strategies, maybe 1 day, 2 day, 3 day. But if there is a breakdown of trust, it may take them weeks and months, even years. What I want to ask you from your experience and what you have seen in around the world is, especially when trust is broken down, when there is a trust trust breaking down, and when somebody is not keeping the words and so on, regaining that trust is very hard compared to generating trust, earning trust. Regaining trust is very, very hard. Do you have any shortcuts? How can they accelerate so that it doesn't take them forever to regain trust?
Yeah. I mean, I don't have a shortcut because it's not the type of thing that can be shortcutted, right? I guess my one piece of advice to remember is that to rebuild trust takes more than apology, right? And first of all, you can't do a non-apology, right? And we all know what a non-apology feels like. I'm sorry if you were offended. That's not an apology. That's a non-apology, right? I did this. It was wrong. It had this negative effect on the team, and I'm owning it. That's an apology, right? That's great. That's a great start. But the next thing that has to happen is, here's what I'm going to do differently in the same scenario. After talking with you, after learning more about this, here's what I'm going to do differently as a result. And then the way you rebuild trust is that people watch you do that differently next time. People aren't actually going to trust that you made the change until they see you in the same scenario acting better, right? That's what it actually takes. And unfortunately, that can take a while, right? But that's what you have to do. It's a twofold thing. You apology for sure, but then you have to talk about what the change as a result is. And then you have to be patient with them and recognize that they're going to have to wait to see you walk out that change. And that can take some time.
One of the books that helped me a lot, and some of our audience may benefit, is The Speed of Trust by Stephen Covey Jr. And he talked about when trust is high, things are done fast, cheaper. And when trust is down, things are done slowly and very expensively. And I think a leader should have that ability to speed up trust, because it affects the bottom line. It affects, it's become very costly. With the remaining time we have, I want to talk about AI. A lot of people are wondering and asking, does conventional team survives the era of AI? People think that AI and robots may take the place of conventional team. Do you have any perspective that you want to share with us? And where do you think conventional team is heading in the age of AI?
Yeah. Oh, I have so many thoughts on this. I would say this: in all the clients that I work with, I see teams responding to AI in one of three ways, right? The first, and this is becoming less and less common, but it's still very much there, is that they perceive AI as a threat. Oh, AI is going to take our jobs. AI is going to do this, or oh, AI will never do it as well, right? Like AI can outscore you on the GMAT. AI can pass the state bar exam. Like, it's pretty smart at this point. So saying that it's never as good, or it's going to be, I understand the threat. I do. But here's the problem. If you're not willing to sort of leverage it, then that's what makes it a threat, right? It's not like, what's the cliche saying, like, AI is not going to replace your job. Someone taking AI, using it to make their job better that's true. Comparatively, if you're not willing to play around with this, it's going to make your performance relative to other folks slower. So I would call that the slower category, right? I see AI as a threat, and as a result, my performance is going to get slower and worse. The second is they see AI as a tool, and I get that, right? They see organizations rolling out look, Teams now has Copilot in it and what have you, but they treat it like it's another technology rollout, like when we all adopted Slack or Asana, or, a project management tool or something like that. And that's great. And if you can streamline certain efforts and make scheduling easier and summarize this huge document or take our meeting notes for you, like that's great. That'll make work simpler, which is great. It frees up more time for team bonding and that sort of stuff. Simpler is great. I think simpler, though, only brings you to a point as a team where your work treads water, where your work stays the same relative to the teams that take the third option. And the third option is that AI is a teammate, right? That it's not a tool, it's an actual teammate. I'm going to use it to make me smarter, right? So we have slower, simpler, smarter. If I use it to make me smarter, I'm going to do things like great example, We talked about conflict earlier, right? And how do you have conflict? How do you push back on ideas without it getting personal? Here's a really easy way to do it. Don't have conflict between two people. Argue with the bot, right? Put your whole plan in. Here's my plan of action. Here's the memo of what I'm going to propose to the rest of my team. Put it into Claude or ChatGPT or whatever and say, tell me what's dumb about this idea. Give me some suggestions to improvement and tell me where this idea might get rejected. Have the conflict with that one. No one ever gets mad because a bot told you you're wrong about something the way they do about a person. So that's great. You can leverage that same diversity of thought and use it as a tool for that, right? That's just conflict. There's a myriad of other ways you can use it to kind of collaborate. And so I see teams responding. I mean, one of three. Teams are always going to be there. Humans need something to do. That's just the reality, right? We're still going to be working even in an era of AI. A lot of the easy tasks are going to be simplified through AI, but the future belongs to the people who've decided to let it make them smarter. And so that's where I see needs to be the proper response. It needs to be a member of the team, not just a tool that we use from time to time, but something we actually collaborate with, let it have its influence. I'm not saying that the AI is going to make decisions for you, but it will make your decisions better by helping you explore more options and that sort of thing. So I'm hugely optimistic on where we head from here.
Yeah, the same way. I'm glad that you shared some of your perspectives that are very important. We have to prepare for it. We have to know how to integrate humans with AI for improving performance. One study that I have seen recently is that AI could actually become one of the indispensable parts of teams because, like you said, for example, they can prepare you to come up with great ideas before you experience pushback. I also discovered that if you are in conflict, AI could actually help you resolve conflicts. Because think about it, the two of us may not be able to get along and emotions may get in the way, conflict of interest and stuff like that. But a third party, which is AI, part of the team that understands the brand, the mission, and understands us, knows better on how to calm down the situation, lower down the tension, and help us to resolve conflict. And the key thing you mentioned about is how can we leverage AI? Rather than considering it as a threat, we should embrace it. I want to hear your thought about this. One thing that I have been processing, and I need your perspective on that, is that if teams, if they have to choose between someone who masters how to use AI and someone who's average in terms of using AI, but they have other skill sets like softer skills, emotional intelligence, the ability to communicate, turn conflicts into opportunities. In the era of AI, which one should you choose? And I want to hear your take. In my case, the question I ask is, if you have someone who masters AI, great, they can leverage AI, but they can't add anything else.
Yeah.
But if somebody is average on using AI, actually AI could help them become smarter in using AI the best way so that you can quickly help this person to develop this ability maybe within days or a month.
Yeah.
But if somebody doesn't know how to get along, if somebody is not a great team player, but they are great in terms of using AI, I don't think that would be a good addition. But it looks like some organizations are tempted to just look for whether this person has great abilities to use AI, neglecting other important skill sets for the health of the team.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, in reality, this is just another version of a question I get asked often, which is, what do I do with a high performer who's not a team player? Well, the reality is, if you're not a team player, you're not actually a high performer. You might hit your individual numbers, but if you're making the numbers on the rest of the team bad, then you're not worth, right, that what it costs to get you to make your own individual numbers. And so I think this is the same way. The one caveat here I would say, right, if we're really just distinguishing between hard skills around this particular tool, this particular technology, teammate, in AI, and soft skills, there's really a question of motivation here and whether or not the person wants to change. Can soft skills be learned? Absolutely. Can they be learned by someone who doesn't want to? No, never. No way, no how, right? And so if that's what I'm having to choose for, right? A person who has this massive, any skill, doesn't matter if it's AI, they're a financial whiz, whatever it is, any skill, technical job skill, and a lack of soft skills, if they don't have the desire to change, they're out. Like they're pass, hard pass, because I can teach the hard skills to the person who wants to develop the soft skills. I can teach the soft skills to a hard skill person who has the desire to do it. I can't do it if you don't. And so the only reason I say pass on that person is, again, if I'm not willing to do it. But like I said, this is another variation on, I think there's this misconception around individuals that you can have an individual high performer who's not a team player. I'm sorry, you cannot. If the behaviors you exhibit are dragging the team down, then it is not worth that cost just to get the good performance out of you. I promise you, almost every time that person's actually more costly than they appear on paper.
Thank you, Dave. I wish we have more time to talk about high-performing teams, but we are running out of time. My advice to those of you who are live and also those of you who are going to watch this on demand, I encourage you to follow Dave and also read his books and figure out how you could be a partner working with him and get his programs. Dave, I know 1 hour is not enough, everybody, to get everything out of you. You have a lot to offer. Do you have any parting words, and where can people find you? And do you have any, for example, any ongoing initiative or program that you invite our audience to look after and seek those kind of programs for you?
Yeah, well, I mean, the easiest place to connect with me is really easy. Right down there is my name. I am one of 2 David Burkuses I've ever found on the internet, and the other one is a 24-year-old Hungarian filmmaker. So if you type that name into your search engine of choice, you're going to find me. Probably. You're going to know if you didn't. And then please connect with me on, if you're watching this live on whatever social platform, just click follow. Let's connect, reach out, connect. If you have to search through David Burkus, do it. And I hope you do, because this is a conversation that's going to be going on for a long time. If I can help in any way on that, I would love to do it, but let's start with just connecting. So, yeah. Thank
you very much, Dave, for coming. You shared a lot of insights that are scientific based and also based on your work with world-class organizations. We appreciate your time, your knowledge, and your wisdom. We look forward to bring you again to this podcast. For those of us who are watching us and now or in the future, I encourage you to follow Dave on social media. He's active on LinkedIn. I also encourage you to check our website, www.the-A-to-Z-institute.com, www.the-A-to-Z-institute.com, and also reach out to us using info@the-A-to-Z-institute.com. And also, we look forward to hear your suggestions. Who should we invite to the podcast? If you have any suggestions of themes that we need to cover. Thank you very much for watching, and we look forward to see you again in another interview. Thank you.